It is such a treat to welcome all of you to the Chapman Cultural Center. If you've not been here before, if you live in Spartanburg County, don't raise your hand. But if you come from outside of Spartanburg County, let me know who you are. It's great. Well, we are thrilled to have you. I want you to know that the Chapman Cultural Center is the home of 8 cultural nonprofits. We are the home to our professional symphony, to our community theater, our youth theater, the Spartanburg Contemporary Art Museum, our Science Center, our History Museum, our local Artists Guild. We just have an amazing place. We're open 7 days a week, 89 hours. Last year we welcomed about 359,000 visitors. So come back. I know we're consuming your afternoon, but I hope that you'll come back often. We are also, though, serve as the countywide local arts agency. So not every county represented here has a local arts agency. Ken May, who is the director of the South Carolina Arts Commission, is here. You can always reach out to the South Carolina Arts Commission to learn more about your local arts sector in your county. But we serve as that role in Spartanburg County. We raise about $1.4 million annually to support the cultural sector and to support local artists. We facilitate cultural planning for our city and our county, and we manage and help develop the Downtown Cultural District. We also partner with all the schools in Spartanburg County, K through 12, to make sure that we have arts and science education in our schools every day. So a big leader in arts education for over 40 years. We also received the Elizabeth O'Neill Verner Award twice in our organization's history, and that reflects on the leadership of our county for many years. I've only been the president since 2011, but it is extraordinary to look at the transformation that's not only happening in Spartanburg, but our entire region. And it's our mission to provide cultural leadership. And in 2013, I went to an Americans for the Arts conference about how to use your cultural assets for economic benefit. And so I drew my first asset map. I hope you can see it on a little legal pad. I drew Main Street and Church Street, and I just sat in that meeting and started picking out the assets I knew about it. I came up with 75. And it dawned on me that if we were going to make any plans for the future in our community, that we needed to know what we have. And so that's how this really started, to say if we're going to be strategic, then we need to know what we already have. And so it's really an aha moment. I hope that if you're not on your phone soon, that you'll go home and look at this map. It was an aha moment for our city leaders when we first did our city mapping, and then when we did our county. Bob Hartwicker is here as our county planning director. When I showed that to him, I don't know where Bob is. I know I saw him walk in, but there, yeah, back there. So, matter of fact, the whole planning department from the county is here. Thank you, woohoo! But that's who helped us do this for the county. So we went around and had 13 public meetings at libraries and local schools, and we learned from our community what exists out there. Who's got artist studios? Where are the galleries and the businesses? And not just private or school galleries, but our banks have art galleries that the public is invited to. So it really took a lot of work by a lot of people. But now that we look at our 10-county region, we compete globally in so many ways. We compete for economic development, we compete in education, we compete in so many ways, but now we are positioned to compete globally as a culturally vibrant county. Dean mentioned my theme, Vibe 365. We love one of our great cities in America, Charleston. We can all claim it as one of our great cities in the state of South Carolina. But they're not the only ones that have the arts in South Carolina. And I go to state arts meetings all the time, and every year we go to Charleston for the annual meeting, Ken. And they've got Spoleto, which we're all proud of, but that's only 3 weeks. I mean, we really do in the Upstate have a vibe 365 days a year. Just in downtown Spartanburg, we have over 1,800 events, festivals, and programs that the public is invited to each year. So when you go back to your communities, my challenge to you is just get started. We've got them on the map. Make sure that what's on the map is correct, but add to it, because As professional leaders and professionals in your own industries, you're always seeking expert advice and research and best practices. We have that in the Upstate through this new tool. We've invited a very special guest to join us today, and it's really an honor for me to welcome Anthony Radich to Spartanburg. He comes to us from Denver, Colorado, one of America's greatest art cities. They lead our nation in very bold and innovative practices using the arts as an economic driver. Anthony has served as the executive director of West Staff. And those of you that aren't in the arts industry, there are 6 national, regional organizations that help advise states in the arts in the United States. They serve the largest geographical region and also 13 states, so the largest state population. Anthony's responsible for providing leadership in the organization's programs and services to these 13 states, and he oversees the areas of research, advocacy, and their online systems development, which was our first link with West Staff. Their goal is to benefit the cultural sector, which is wonderful to have national leadership at that level. Prior to joining West Staff, Anthony served as the executive director of the Missouri Arts Council, where he led the successful effort to create a statewide cultural fund, trust fund that supported the arts statewide. Following that, he did something that is really integral to our conversation today. He was the senior project manager for arts, tourism, and cultural resources for the Committee of National Conferences of State Legislators. So we have a very strong delegation in Spartanburg County. All of us have delegations at the state level, and we're going to learn today about how to use this information. From Anthony. As the senior project manager, he worked with state legislators across the country to develop state-level legislation and policy concerning with arts, tourism, and historic preservation. So please help me welcome Anthony Radich to Spartanburg and to the Upstate.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's a pleasure to be in a space both in this building and in this community and in this region that is so vibrant and really obviously so, visibly so. So I have not been, I've been to Gaffney before, but never down this way, and not very far from Gaffney, but very, very impressive. I want to talk, before I do my formal presentation, just a bit about regionalism at the state level. When I was in Missouri, I had the benefit of being embedded as a state arts agency within the Economic Development Department. So part of that structure allowed me and got me on the road, and we did an on-the-road session every year. Each of Missouri has several regions, economic regions, and they presented the arts alongside tourism, special investment, on and on and on. And there are some parts of Missouri, like there are in any state, that are really hard to think about tourism in, and they need some arts work and whatever. But it was really a pleasure to work side by side with economic development and be a part of their concept of overall economic and community development. I want to start by talking just a little bit about the creative economy. And there are many experts in this room who've gone through, I'm sure, several cycles of economic development and rinse cycles of economic development and strategies, on and on. And I always find in economic development land, although sometimes it's a little tiring to go through a strategy, you always learn something from that strategy. Something usually benefits from that strategy. It may not be even across the board. But I'd like to put before you the fact that for the last 10 or so years now, there's been a lot of focus on the creative economy as something to power the overall economy in a state or sub-region. And many people have ignored the creative economy in the past for a number of reasons. And one of those reasons is that when people used to intersect with the arts or culture over the years, they intersected primarily through the writing of a check, the giving of $1. And in their minds, for many years, they thought that arts must cost money. What could it do for the economic structure of a state or region? They're at my door all the time asking for money. How could this help the economy? So in developing an argument for the value of the arts to economic development, economic impact studies were developed, and those economic impact studies proved a number of things. One is that the arts employ people, and as you saw on the cultural asset map, there are a number of institutions, and you can tell how many people are employed in that region, in arts and culture and creative work. People in the arts and nonprofit arts purchase goods and services. They're like anyone else. They have to buy groceries, they have to buy paint, to paint their houses, etc. So there was, through these studies, an increasing understanding that the arts aren't just something that you give money to and the money disappears. Actually, it floats around and multiplies within the community. I think the other dimension of economic impact studies that is pertinent to this conversation is they identified how they were related to tourism. And in some cases, like Spoleto Festival, yes, it's a destination and people might make a decision to go to Charleston because of the festival. But in other cases, and I'll give you an example, I worked on the economic impact study for the Aspen Music Festival several years ago. And this is a festival that has drawing power on its own, like Spoleto. But in our study, we carefully asked people why they were in Aspen. What percentage of their time, what percentage of their decision was based on the music festival, outdoor activities, galleries, other activities. And and I think what you find is when culture relates to tourism, yes, there are those one-of-a-kind singular events where people will drive 200 miles or fly in for that. That's great. But you don't always need those. You need culture sometimes just as a mix of things in a basket of items that attracts people. You can't be at the performance 24 hours a day. You have to visit a gallery. So having that mixture, and that was identified earlier, woven into a tourism strategy is very, very important. The other thing I'd say about economic impact and the arts is that going back to those old days when people thought, you write a check to the arts, that's maybe not great economic development. The other attitude that was pretty prevalent that has changed dramatically is creative people are kind of undependable and not really contributing much to our society. But what you hear a lot about today in terms of employment and cultivation of new employees, it's the creative worker. And we like creative workers. We can't survive on people who are just command and control people. We need a creative sector with creative minds. So those people now have quite a different value than they used to have. So over time, there's become this increasing realization that the nonprofit arts are not there on their own. They're part of a continuum. And yes, some of them require considerable subsidy to stay alive and be vibrant and be quality. But all along the continuum, outside of the nonprofit, you move to quasi-nonprofit, public-private, and over here you have totally for-profit creative activities. So you're embedding the nonprofit arts, which is the traditional way people think about these things, in a much bigger venue, and you're allowing creative economy developers a much bigger palette from which to choose. One thing we've worked with this community on is the Creative Vitality tool, and I'm not going to talk about it in any depth, but I just want to note that one reason, and the previous presenter implied this, we can do a lot of these things now that we couldn't do so easily not so very long ago because we have data, access to data at a good price, we have mapping capabilities, so there's much more we can do now to consider how we are going to develop the creative economy than we could do 20, 30 years ago. We just didn't really have the data. Another problem with the data we did have was that so much of it was in the arts sector, what I would call advocacy data. Not good data, not scientifically collected and vetted, but it came out with a great soundbite. But frankly, in my work with state legislators over the years, really not believable by state legislators or serious economic development officials, many of whom are in the audience today. So the arts have come a long way, the nonprofit arts and creative economy crowd, in getting access to serious data that actually is used by economic development people who are not necessarily involved in creative economy of the arts, but find it credible. So with that data, there's a lot you can learn about places and how to develop them. And let me talk a little bit about that, how people use creative economy data these days. One is, and again, the previous speaker showed this, you can analyze a situation. Another thing people are doing is creating baselines. If we are indeed supporting the creative economy, trying to develop it, are we seeing increases in those creative economy jobs, et cetera, et cetera? That's doable now. You can also use it to support a plan, such as been done here, and you can also use it to better direct resources so that the things you invest in terms of economic development have the greatest power and output possible. You can use it for advocacy, and I always like to see data in state legislatures and elsewhere because in the creative economy and art world, some people whine about the fact that it's art for art's sake, why do we have to do the data thing? But you know, the tourism people have data, the special investment people have data, and if you're competing for a part of the pie in a state legislature or governor's office, you better have your data. And now it's possible for arts people and creative economy people to have good data. You also need data to partner with people. And in the world of advocacy, it's hard to have a stable, committed partner if you have flaky data. So having data about your world, the creative economy world, the nonprofit arts world, makes you much more desirable as a partner because you've done your background work and you're ready to go. And that's what I see from the presentation made earlier here about the 10 county region. You also can use data to measure growth. I think everyone would like growth, and you know, I had an argument with someone recently. She was saying, well, we don't need growth for growth's sake. But you know, you need growth for a sort of sake because we have inflation, although it's been low the last few years. You have to keep growing. You need growth to better service the people who already live in an area who, if they don't have growth, may not have the same level of services their neighbors have, and on and on. So measuring growth through creative economy data is really important. You also need it for support of special initiatives. This facility is an amazing special initiative, but you know, there are other special initiatives, and we all know people with great ideas. I mean, I'm sure many of you in the room have a revolving door of the great idea people, some of whom just goes to the revolving door because it's just a great idea that has no basis in fact. But good data can give you some of the facts, and it can be used to power an initiative, and that's, in today's world, that is data-centric, that's really important. Data is also important to inform policy, and again, you've built this great facility here. There are buildings going up around town, there are parks, there are lots of things, but you seem to be in a phenomenal growth stage. So I hear the words about really using data to influence policy long term for the better of people in this region. And again, you now have available to you serious data at a reasonable cost that can be in dialogue with policymakers about changing policy. Because you know, I think we all know, we can't be everywhere at every meeting to influence every decision. But if you have policy made that benefits creative economy development, supports the nonprofit arts, you can then sort of be at every meeting because there's a policy that will influence decisions related to that. Another example of influencing policy is a lot of communities are interested in attracting software development and the software developers and the like. And that's great, and there's some initiatives that are underway, but you really need some policies, like how are you going to attract them? How are you going to measure the success of that attraction? And that's all data-driven stuff that has to be paid attention to. I just wanted to point out, again, here's something from the Creative Vitality Suite product that we that we use and has been used here in Spartanburg. I just wanted to show you some of the data that you can get. In the 10-county area, if you look at the top line, software developers and software workers in general, in 2015 you had 1,143, and you had 1,131 in 2016. That means 12 people left. Now, is that an accurate measure? Yes, according to the data available from national sources, including the Bureau of Labor Statistics. But I'm not saying you should be alarmed, and the headline shouldn't be 12 people leave the region. The headline probably should be, doesn't look like it's growing very rapidly right now over that 2-year period, but the question is, let's look at a 5-year trend. Did it take a jump prior to that time? But then if you look down, here's something that's not often thought of as creative economy, but cooks and head chefs. We don't include that in all our creative economy data, but the state of Louisiana asked for it because food and food arts are a very important part of their creative economy. So this is another way to look at creative economy workers. And in the 10-county area, there's actually a growth of 46 jobs in that area, according to our data. And finally, something that I like that people think I'm just kind of nutty about, but I think the directors of religious activities and education in large churches. And here you have a number of them. And in our state, Colorado Springs has a lot of giant churches. And I don't know how you work with that crowd to promote creative economy, but I think what's nice about the data is it shows, hey, here's some people, they love the arts, they seem to know how to work with a nonprofit group, they seem to work in large groups. How can we use them to promote whatever we're going to do here? And I think we have lists and lists and lists of these kinds of people that you can analyze and say, all right, as we're building this initiative in the 10-county area, who on this list is related to the creative economy? And you don't have to include them, but maybe we should think about including them. And how would that work? I just want to talk briefly about location quotient, and this is something that we work with in a number of areas around the country. This is really essentially the concentration of a certain type of worker in a certain area. And you'll see I'm doing this for architects. And, the location quotient, you'll see LQ, point something. It varies among the counties, and that's reasonable. But what would you do with this? And let me offer a suggestion. Let's say you decide that you have enough architects that you actually want to develop architecture as an export industry. In other words, you want people from North Carolina and outside your 10-state region to come to this region for architecture services. That should be a real decision of the planner, the economic planner. So do you have enough kind of tissue there to build on? Is there architectural education going on in the universities around here? Do you need to install that so you can build architecture? Basically, can you build on this? Or take any one of the other 90-some occupations and analyze it the same way. Do you have enough density, and is it worth building on that density? And how would you do it? I also use the example of florists. Another part of the creative economy frequently overlooked. Forests, you might imagine in Hawaii. The forest industry is a huge industry. And it's surprising if you looked across the country, there are spots in this country which have a really high location point, really high concentration of forests. If you were to find that in the 10-county region, do you want to develop forests? That's a question for you. And this will help you not decide, it'll help inform you, and then you have to make several decisions. And then what do you do with that? Do you have a floral festival? Do you encourage certificates in floral development? How do you develop it? But I bring these two up to note. Architects, I think, are commonly thought of as part of creative economy, but I'm not sure floral designers are commonly, and I'm not sure directors of church arts programs are. Those are all part of our world, and all people we should be concerned about if we're thinking of moving this forward. I want to also note that when we talk about creative economy, you need to know there's no single overarching definition. There's no ironclad definition. If you look across the country, people have come up with various definitions. But frankly, there is none, and that's why in our tool, we made it possible for people to turn on and off different things so they can make their definition of the creative economy congruent with the local definition. For example, some people include food services. I mentioned the Louisiana crowd. Well, if you don't want to include food services, you can take it out. Some people include software development. And I always argue, if you are an arts agency, you've never done anything with software development, and you're trying to fluff up your numbers, well, maybe don't try that, because someone's going to say, that's a great big number, but you're doing nothing to stimulate the development of software development except providing quality of life, which actually is a contribution, but it's harder to measure. So there are various ways to think about creative economy. Again, no definition. We always advise, try to be as congruent with the local state definition as you can be. And remember, think carefully before you include something like software, which will actually essentially double the number of creative occupations in many, many places. Also, when you're looking at what to do in terms of moving forward, there are various ways to analyze creative occupations and other aspects of the creative economy. You can do it by zip code level, county, MSA, state, and I think Chattanooga, am I correct? Is that your sample competing area or not? Yes? Someone's saying yes, Dean is saying yes. So you can look at, all right, so if you think you compete with Chattanooga, Tennessee, Fort Collins, Colorado, and wherever, you can pull those things up and look. You can also look nowadays, because of the ability of data availability, you can look at creative economy data at the zip code level. And you can't do it on a street level yet, but you can do it on a zip code level, which is pretty marvelous. The data that's available comes from many different sources, and I think I'm not going to go through this in the interest of time. But I do want to go here. We just finished, including in our tool, a review of racial and ethnic diversity in the creative economy. And what you see here, on the lower part of this, is the breakdown in between diverse populations and white populations in the US, and then the breakdown between which of those people are actually employed in the creative economy. And unfortunately, nationwide, it's not a pretty picture. If 38.7% of the nation is non-white, only 26.5% of the nation's workers in the creative economy are non-white. So that's an issue. And the same, unfortunately, is true of this area. So this is a place where you're tracking the national trend, but I would argue we all need to work to change that around, because I don't think that's the most healthy trend that we could have in creative economy work when we have so many creative people of color who could be part of this movement. Just to remind you that I've talked a lot about for-profit creative data. There's also an ability to extract nonprofit data. And I always tell elected officials who are poo-pooing the size of the nonprofit arts group, so if you look at some of these larger groups and package them together and look at how many people they employ and how much revenue they bring in, and again, here's revenue for the 10-county region, you would die to bring an industry like that to your home area. It's not a single hospital, it's a network of things. So you hopefully will appreciate that and try to keep this healthy, because it in itself is a medium-sized industry. All right, I'm going to close by, I was asked to talk a little bit about advocacy, and I have a lot of experience in that, but I'll keep myself to a limited number of words here. One is, I always like to approach elected officials as people who want to solve problems. And I know there are cranky elected officials, and there are people who you think are just going to do nothing. And they can be very frustrated. But they didn't get elected to do nothing. Even if they got elected, they maybe said their problem, they thought, was the state did too much. And they wanted the state to do nothing, but they don't want to do nothing. So they do want to solve problems. And I've worked with a lot of officials from one side of the political spectrum to the other. And I have to say, there are some who are sort of tiring sometimes, but I can't think of one that isn't in the business to do anything but try to solve problems in some way. So I encourage you to keep that in mind when you're dealing with elected officials. I also encourage you to keep in mind that the big idea is often a better idea. You're sitting in a facility that was really a big idea. And you can see it was a big idea, well executed, and it turned out. And I think, I would argue, and I don't know that much about it, except from what I've talked with Jennifer about earlier, I would argue if it weren't as big as an idea as it was, it might have had a difficult time getting off the ground. And I think when you're doing creative economy initiatives, nonprofit arts initiatives, a bigger idea, an idea beyond, I just want to keep the same money I have because I can't, what's the bigger idea? Is the bigger idea, I'd like to initiate a series of festivals in the 10-county area, and I'd like enough seed money to keep them going for 5 years, and I want them to be of this and this and this dimension, and I'll tie the arts people into those festivals, and here's how what's the bigger idea that opens up the conversation? Legislators always hear about the budget thing and a few other things. So how do you distinguish yourselves? You have a big, credible idea supported by data. I also like to encourage people to think about the multi-year effort. Big ideas take time, and you need time to educate people to the idea, create some momentum, and build support. And it just takes time to do that. And then I think the last thing is advocacy needs to include everyone. And I can't tell you the number of times I've been in meetings where people don't want to include this one or that one or whatever. Well, the arts community the nonprofit arts community is pretty small. The creative economy community is much larger, but it's much more diverse. But, it's hard to succeed unless you don't spend all your time thinking about who shouldn't be there, but think about how you get everyone there. That is ultimately successful advocacy. So in closing, I just want to say I appreciate being invited here. It's been a pleasure to see the expression of the arts in this community, really marvelous. And it's been great to see the 10-state mapping, really, I think, a base for a lot of interesting development. And I look forward to seeing where you are 5 years from now, because it looks like you have the data, the leadership, and the bigger idea to move forward. Thank you very much.